to the iCloud. And then we'll get started. All right, tonight we're going to talk about governance and operations. So we're going to be a little hodgepodge and jump around. Stop me when you have a question. So let me get started here. All right, first thing we're going to talk about is governance, which is your board. Right now, it's your planning committee, but it will turn into your board. And so the application is asking for a description of the governance and operation of the charter school, including the nature and extent of parental, professional, educator, and community involvement in the governance and operation of the charter school. So that sounds like huge, and it is like this really big question. But what it's really wanting you to do is break down the difference between what's the role of your board and what's the role of your staff. And we're going to talk about that as we go through these next few slides, okay? So the board requirement from the law is that you have to have at least 7 members. I'm going to tell you to have more than that. I'm telling you that because if you lose a member, you're not really a legal board. So best to write in your bylaws that you're going to have 7 to 9. And always better to have 9 because it's an odd number. Having 8, obviously you could end up in a tie. If you have 8, many boards have a rule that the board chair does not vote unless it's a tie. And that would throw off the, your 8, you would no longer have an 8 to a 4 to 4 vote. Lots of things you can do there, but you must have 7. 50% of the members must have a background in either business or education. Business is very broad. Education has to be K-12. It cannot be college. They have to have K-12. It can be private school. It doesn't say public education. It just says K-12. Members cannot have a felony conviction, so you will have to have a sled check run on every member. And these are things that should show up in your bylaws so that they match the charter application and match the law. Board members can be elected or appointed, but only up to 50% can be appointed. So if you have 8, 4 can be appointed, 4 can be elected. Now, the problem with that is if you have 8, if you lose an elected one, now you're out of balance with the state law, and you're going to have to quickly do a special election to get that person back. Because typically, however someone gets on the board is how you do a special election. Now, you can change around some people that they were elected, but you lost an appointed. So you're going to run an election and move somebody over to an appointed. That's fine. You just have to make sure you keep the 50%, no more than 50%. If you have 7 members, 3 can be appointed, 4 have to be elected. Okay. So
right quick, the education background, you said no college, but if you certify, like, I guess if you're a speech teacher or special ed or something like that, handle that.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. You just have to have an education background in K-12. It doesn't necessarily have to be a teacher. However, here's some differences in the planning committee and the board. You start out as a planning committee. That's what you are right now. And so long as you have not already gone and created yourself as a nonprofit under the Secretary of State's office, which I hope you haven't done that yet, because if you did, now you made yourself a board. You made yourself of a board of a nonprofit, not of a charter school, but of a nonprofit. So technically, you would have to follow the law for the nonprofit, and your charter committee kind of works under that and alongside that. But once you fill out that paperwork, which you must do before you can turn in your application, right now you're still a planning committee, which means you don't have any FOIA or anything to do. So a planning committee can have just as many people as you want it to have. And the more the merrier, less work to go around. You want a lot of people on that planning committee, like we talked before about recruiting, right? A board is limited to the number that's in your bylaws. So must have no less than 7, what I just said, but preferably you have more than that. A planning committee must have 1 teacher. It does not have to be public school teacher, but it must have 1 teacher. and they can be retired. The board does not require that. You don't have, that teacher is just to help you when you write the application to understand basically curriculum standards is what they're looking for there. And just the experience of what an everyday, a typical day in the school is like. The planning committee is not required to follow the open meetings laws, but a board is. So again, if you went and you're already a board under nonprofit, you must do that. The planning committee only lasts till the first school election. And then it dissolves, no more. And the application's asking you, how's that process going to work? And I'm going to show you some of the things that should happen to make that work. Okay. Again, the board must post an agenda and meetings and have public comment. And samples of what that should look like is on any charter school website you'd like to go to. All their board members and agendas should be posted so you can get an idea, particularly of the rules when it comes to public comment. And in a board, you must elect a board member. The elections and appointments happen at least every 2 years. Typically, you will have an election and an appointment cycle every year because you don't want them to everybody change over all at one time. So half of your people, half of your elected will, the first time they serve will be a 2-year term, half will be a 1-year term, so that you're on alternate cycles. So you'll lose 2 and 2 and 2 and 2, not all 4 at one time, because you literally could have a whole board turnover at one time if you don't split the cycles. So when you're writing your application, you need to think about that process. Again, I would strongly suggest that you visit some of their charter schools, look at their board page, look at their members, and download their bylaws and read through their bylaws, because you must turn in sample bylaws. So it's a really good way to help you not have to recreate the wheel. Okay, I have to move my little thing around here so I can see this. So a couple of things that the application is going to ask you, again, is the description of the governance and operation of the proposed charter school. It wants to know the difference. An explanation of the proposed transition. So they really want you to tell them what I'm looking for is who's staying, how many people are staying on as an appointed rollover position to the board, and how many people are going to run for election. So long as you're not past that 50%, that's completely up to you. The application is going to ask you for a plan for ongoing board training and capacity building. So as it stands right now, the State Department has taken back the training for school boards. And actually the very first training is tomorrow, and it's an all-day deal. They are working on going to have night ones because people work, because all board members are volunteers, right? And you cannot get paid to be on a board of a charter school. You can get expenses reimbursed. You cannot get paid. That is explicit in the law. So that board training must come from the State Department for your first time newbies. Certainly, I would like to see you tell me how the board's going to continue in training, whether that be strategic planning meetings, whether you have just a basic training every year, all those things, but something you need to keep current with the board. An explanation of the proposed board meeting frequency and focus and the role of any standing subcommittees. So how many times are you going to meet a year? I will tell you, it's hard to run a school unless you meet monthly. Now, you don't have to meet every single month. Most schools don't meet in July during the summer, and most schools don't meet at December. But certainly 10 meetings, you're going to have. Tell me how you're going to, about special meetings, committee meetings. And again, go look at people's bylaws and you'll get a really good idea of how that works for schools. If you tell me that you're only going to meet quarterly, I'm going to have a hard time believing you're going to be an effective board. Things happen every month. There are monthly financials. You need to be aware of that. Things can change really quickly for a school from month to month. So you need to be aware of that. I'm not telling you can't do that, but I'm telling you it really doesn't line up with an effective governance plan.
Quick question. How did you say you go about doing the election, since it's not, I know how they do it in regular school systems or whatever. How do you do it in a charter school system?
Okay, we're gonna talk about it in a minute. Give me just a second. We'll get to
Oh,
that.
okay.
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 Yeah, so they want to know how you're going to hire the lead administrator and how that's going to happen. If you're not going to do a national search, don't tell us you're going to. If you know who you're going to hire and that person's on the committee, you can just tell us that and be truthful about it. I don't want you to go out and say you're going to do all this and then it causes havoc within your committee because you already knew who you were going to hire. If that's going to be your lead person, then be honest about that in your application. But if you don't have a lead person and you don't absolutely already knew who that's going to be, then absolutely tell me how you're going to do a search. I understand you have full authority as a planning committee until you become a board, and then the board has that authority. Description of relationship between the governing board and the school administrator. We'll talk about that in a minute. And just statements of liability and indemnification, basically saying that you're not going to hold the Limestone liable for things that we didn't have any control over. All right. Okay. So back to description of governance. In short, the board is a policy-making board that has oversight to the outcomes that the school produces. It is the responsibility of the board to make sure that the school is doing what they said they're going to do in their charter and holding either the EMO, which I'll talk about in a minute, or the principal accountable. And so when what you should hear the board say is, what's the outcome? How did that work? Was that effective? Show me the evidence that that was effective. What you should hear the staff say is, this is how we're going to do it. When the board starts saying, this is how we're going to do it, talking about day-to-day operations, they've crossed the line and they're in operations, and that's not good governance. And actually, they're kind of violating the law, right? So you as a board should not be talking to the principal about day-to-day operations. You should be asking them, what's the plan? How are we evaluating it? And did it work? And if it didn't work, why didn't it work? And now what are you going to do? So stay out of the weeds, focus on policy, oversight, and financials. Okay, so here we go. So the board oversees the administration operations of the school. They do not do them, they oversee them. The board does not manage the day-to-day operations of the school. That's the principal's job. The board evaluates the principal or the EMO, as well as how the school is performing academically, financially, and organizationally. Are we effective? Are we doing what we said you're going to do? Board members are required by law to receive board training the first year. That's the only requirement you have. The very first time you're a board member, you have to go through a training within that first year. But again, best practice is you have multiple trainings. Charter school law expressly forbids board members from being paid. Be very careful of conflicts of interest, particularly with your principals and nepotism. It is you most definitely should have a policy that says that the board members cannot be married to employees of the school, because that's just, that's just a conflict of interest. Also, your principal should not be able to hire their immediate family. That is just bad operations. All right, and understand that the board is falls under FOIA for the Freedom of Information Act. So you must adhere to that. If you get a subpoena, if you get FOIA'd for information, if you actually get a FOIA, you absolutely send that to your attorney before you do anything. All right. Obviously, people have the right to come to your board meeting. They have the right to speak in public. Usually boards give people 3 minutes. And if there's a whole bunch of people there and they're all there for the same reason, if you can ask them to combine their time, and you understand that one person is speaking for 10, you cannot just sit there all night long. You have to cut it off somewhere. Use reasonable common sense as to where you cut it off, but you are required to do public comment. Okay, the application wants to know that, that how you're going to transition. Okay, the planning committee at this stage, and that will include once you become a nonprofit board, we're not talking about the school board, the nonprofit board, then you have the full authority to do everything. You're going to sign the lease. You're going to, because you can't have a board until there's a school open. You're going to sign the lease. You're going to hire the principal's going to hire everybody else. You're not. You're going to sign the insurance papers and any policies. And if you go to the bond market and you work with a developer, you as the planning committee and the board of the nonprofit that you formed are signing all those papers. You have full authority. But once school starts, then you must hold an election. And like I said, typically what you have, if you're moving 7, 3 people roll as automatics on to be the board. They're appointed to the board. Your whole school board is not elected in the fall, right after school starts, after you spent all this year trying to get it open, and them have zero understanding or information of what just happened in that year. So you need consistency. So typically you'll have 3 who will be appointed from the board planning committee over here, and then everybody else runs for election. You should run that election as soon as you can in the fall, because understand that you as a school and a board are responsible for millions of dollars. And the bigger your school, you could be looking at millions of dollars just within the first 2 months that's sitting in bank accounts, right? And you don't want a planning committee that's 13, 14, 15 people all having say in that. That's just not how that can work. That nonprofit board rolls over to become the school board after that election. So how elections work is that each student, each parent has a vote for the board. Now, there's a little controversy about this. That's why I didn't put this in writing. I'm just going to tell you the controversy. Some schools say 1 child, 1 vote. So it's a parent situation. Other schools have now said in the last couple of years, no, it's 1 parent, 1 vote. So if I'm a divorced family, we both get to vote. Or even if I'm not, we both are a parent of that child and we both get to vote. You may choose how you do that. But you've got to tell us how that's going to work. Also, staff gets a vote. And so if they get a vote for being a staff, but if they're also a parent, they also get a vote for being a parent. So they actually get to vote twice. Now, and when you look at elections, guys, here's what you should not do. You should not have parents fill out an application, have a decision on who gets to be on the ballot, and then tell parents, okay, here's our slate. You voted up or down. That's not true choice. That's somebody telling you, here's your choice. You need to pick this. What you should do, and what I'm looking for you to tell me you're going to do, is that you're going to take applications. You may have a committee that determines if those applications meet your standard. So you may put in your standards, you have to have a college degree, or you have to have at least a high school diploma. You can be that you've sit on another board before, because maybe you don't want a newbie in that making decisions about millions of dollars, right? You can put other things in your standard for a board member. You cannot discriminate based on race, sex, national origin, all those things. You know you can't do that. But you can put stuff that would apply. You can also put in your election for our board of 9 people, 2 have to be parents, or only 2 can be parents. There's, there have to be, but all 9 can be parents if that's how it worked out. Or you can do it to where you have to have 4 community. So you need to you can work on that. Again, this is what I'm saying. Go look at lots of schools' bylaws and look at their elections to see what they're asking and see what you feel most comfortable with. I will say, in my opinion, you never want an all parent board. Parent boards get really funky because it becomes about their individual children, because we're human, right? We want to make sure our child gets the best situation because they're our child. You need some objectivity of people who are not parents on the board, but you certainly don't want to have a board that doesn't have any parents. Another thing you can do, if you so choose in your governance plan, is for like where my child goes, that's a Chinese immersion school, they must have so many people that are native speakers, so that when they're talking about Chinese language and culture, there's experts sitting on the board. Let's say you're a STEM school and you want to say, we need to have 1 mathematician and 1 engineer on our board. That's perfectly fine too, because that fits the mission of your school. And so you need that expertise. Some schools do that. Some just say whoever, parents, community members, they have no regulations whatsoever. You as a board, you as a planning committee, as you're writing this, need to decide amongst yourselves what would make an effective board for the type of school we're trying to bring on. Right? Lots of freedom there. Just remember the 50-50 rule. About 50% of them have to have either a business background or an education background, not right? And only up to 50% can be appointed. Other than that, you got a lot of freedom. Any questions about that?
Yeah, like with a nonprofit, do it have to be a 501c3 or just nonprofit through the state?
No, you have to be a 501c3, but you don't do that until after you're approved. So all you have to do is go to the Secretary of State website, fill out the paperwork to be a nonprofit, and send it in, and they will stamp it and send it back to you as your letter, as your articles of incorporation, and your nonprofit status under the state. Once you get approved and you write your application for your planning and implementation grant, also called the charter school grant, as soon as you get approved, you need to go apply to be a 501c3. I suggest to you that you let your financial services people do that for you, because there's a lot to it and they're going to charge you a certain amount, but you can pay them through your planning and implementation grant for that. I also want to put a plug here for the Charter School Alliance. When it comes to talking about training, they used to provide the training for charter schools, and that's changed now because the state law says that it is done by the state. But for years they used the Alliance, and now that is not going to be the case. It is going to go back to the state. But the Alliance does a conference in the fall of every year, and it's coming up at the end of November, and I would strongly urge you guys to attend. You'll meet everybody and their brother. You'll meet me there. And they have lots of breakout sessions, and they have lots of trainings for boards that's above and beyond the first time newbie introductory training. So try to put that on your calendar and show up. I also want to say that boards really need to have some strategic planning meetings every so many years, whatever that may be. You decide that. It might be every 3. It doesn't need to be every year, because you certainly are, when you're doing strategic planning, want to look at least 2 to 3 years. But you need to do that because your board changes over so much. It's really helpful to have a strategic plan. All right. Okay, so going back to this question, just being very clear here as you write your application and understanding the board should be in the business of, the board should not be in the business of operations. The board should be in the business of outcomes. The principal says, how are we going to do this? The board says, how well did it work? Okay, so this is really hodgepodge. We're talking about operations. So we're going to talk a little bit about discipline, because this is also a part of your application. You will have to tell us what is your discipline policy, and you're going to have to turn in a sample discipline, whether it be a policy, whether it's tiers, it could be anything, however you want. Again, please go to different charter schools, look and see how they do it. There's a lot of unique discipline out there. So right now, one of the big things is restorative justice. All right. So if you're really interested in that, where there's not suspensions, it's what do you got to do to, now you got extra work, or you've got community service or something like that. Go look some of that up. Lots of charter schools have that. And discipline policies are typically part of everybody's handbook, and their handbook is 9 times out of 10 online. So do your research and look into that. Okay, but here are some absolutes, all right? So the discipline policy must include disciplinary actions to be taken. You have to tell us what those are going to be. I understand totally that you're going to change this policy as you develop your school, as you talk more as a board, as you have things happen when you're open. Right now, we understand this is a sample. This is the train of thought you have. There will be tweaks to it. There's going to be tweaks to everything you do. You're going to write this application, says exactly what our school is going to look like. And in a year from now, it's not going to look like that. That's just how life happens, right? You just have to stay in line and know when you have to ask for an amendment and when you don't. Okay, so I'm going to really, truly caution you here about taking a local district and just putting your name on it. I'm going to know if you did that. Because typically these things, the district level looks a whole lot different than the school. And so please, if you take a district policy, you can do that. You just need to read through it and make sure you're making it your own and making those changes. One of the things it must have is an appeal process for students recommended for expulsion that includes a right to appeal the decision to the charter school board. So understand, technically, it is the board that expels kids, not the principal. The principal will put the student up for expulsion, but it is the board that makes that decision. So if you see a school, particularly a charter school, that the principal expelled a kid, then I would certainly tell that parent, look, that really has to go to the board. Now, most schools do that and they know that, but just understanding that that is not a principal decision. Discipline appeals do not come to Limestone's Board of Trustees. It stays at the district level. The only way that you could go any further than that is you would have to take this, that the parent would have to take you to court. So whatever the board's decision is, there is no appeal up to Limestone's Board of Trustees, up to the authorizer. Even though we're the district, that is solely in your custody. So don't write in your charter that it will go up to the district. It will not, okay? Okay, also about discipline is that you must have an assurance that the charter school will comply with 5963-235, which provides the expulsion of any student who brings a firearm to school. You must expel that kid. And I have to move my little thing around here to see my screen. Sorry about that. An assurance that the charter school will comply with the FERPA, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which means that you can't in any way tell anybody that this kid's being expelled. That is something you talk about in executive session. And there are 3 things you talk about in executive session: contracts, legal advice, and personnel. And personnel also includes students. So if you have a disciplinary situation where you think a kid is up for expulsion, that conversation happens in executive session. and an explanation of the policies with regard to student conduct, rights, and responsibilities that will be given to parents and students at the beginning of the school year. So you must tell us that you are going to give this, you ensure to us that you are going to make sure parents have this information. These are usually in the student handbook, but if the handbook's not available at the time of submission, please don't just rename somebody else's stuff, all right? But you're gonna have to give us a sample. But I want to see a sample that you've thought through. Okay, let's talk about employees. All operations. So we're talking about state employees versus people who work for an EMO, and so which really that makes them a private employee. All right. So, maybe I should talk about, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot about EMOs, but just understand it's a management organization that provides operational services. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But when it comes to employees, if the employees work at the school, for the school, which is under the board's supervision, so there's the board hires the principal, and then that's it. The only person the board hires is the principal, head of school, whatever they're going to be called, executive director. They don't hire anybody else. Everything under that is the head of school, principal, executive director, right? You do not take people to the board for approval for hiring. That's not what they do. That's not what charter schools do. Okay. The application must provide an explanation of the relationship that will exist between the charter school and its employees. So this must include evidence that the terms and conditions of employment are addressed with affected employees and their recognized representative, if any. In addition, proposed employment policies must be included. If the charter will contract with an EMO, the relationship between the school and the employees must be clearly stated in the application. So what that means is that teachers and staff can either be an employee of the school as a state employee, or they recognize as a state employee, or they are an employee of a third party, the EMO, and that EMO contracts all their services, including teachers, back to the board. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what I want to make sure you understand, technically, a charter school is run by a nonprofit, but because they're school teachers, they qualify for state benefits because you're getting state money, right? Okay, so a traditional school district does not have to go and declare itself a nonprofit. It is by the nature, it's a school district. A charter school does have to do that, but it makes those teachers eligible for state benefits. So for retirement, for PIBA, which is health benefits, all that, eyes, vision, all that. If you work for an EMO, you are not entitled to the state benefits. A charter school can choose to offer to its employees state retirement, but nobody does because nobody can afford it. The first ones, when they were first done, they did, but the cost is outrageous now. And so all the charter schools that are happened in the last 10 years have basically, they have a private retirement plan, a 403B, or it could be a simple IRA, whatever it is, but it is not state benefits, but you can do it if you choose to. Got a question?
I do real quick. So just clarification for me. If the charter school does employees as state employees versus hiring an EMO,
Yeah.
Would the retirement, so you're saying basically nobody does that, would the retirement be separate?
Yeah.
Or would they still qualify for state retirement, and that's not, so to speak, coming out of the funding?
Okay, so here's the deal with state retirement. Everybody's in or everybody's out. And once you're in and you can't get out. So a school has to make that decision at the very, very beginning. And if they're going to do state retirement, they're in it for life. No matter how much it costs, they're in it for life. That's why they don't do it anymore. So there are several retirement companies that you'll see at these conferences that are starting to really get charter schools, and they're creating these programs just for charter schools. And so it's usually a 3 to 5% match. Oh, you've been here for 10 years. We're going to up you to 7%. Whatever you put in, we'll match it up to 7%. Some just say, we don't really care if you put in anything or not. We're going to put in 2% of your salary or 3% of your salary. That is up to you. You just have to work that out in your budget and be able to afford it.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So you're saying it's best, well, it seems like you're saying it's best to hire pretty much everybody through EMO.
Well,
like you said,
not necessarily. I mean, for some, if you've got a group that really is kind of on it and they want to be super involved and they want to, they want to hire a principal, but understanding that all those contracts that the school has, that is all the board's doing all that work. They're contracting with the curriculum provider. They're contracting with the financial service provider. The two things that the board must contract with, apart from anything else, is the auditor and your attorney. Those are absolute straight contracts to the board, and the school should not be involved in that. Nobody in the operation should be involved in that, really. I mean, you might say, hey, here's a bunch of auditors, that work with charter schools. Here you go. But everything else, while the board signs contracts, the EMO
reason I was asking that was because you said, it sounded like you said if we're a straight charter school, and since we are getting state funds, then if you hire somebody through the board at a charter school, then you have to pay into the teacher retirement. All the
now
state
you will
benefits,
get state
right?
funds, so it's kind of funny right now, to be honest with you. So here's what's kind of happening. Okay. So as it stands right now, regardless of whether a school has an EMO or not, they are actually getting the state benefit money that goes to the school. The school's still getting that money. The school is deciding if we want to, and so since the school can't use PIBA, the school is if they're using an EMO, they are finding they're finding other ways to provide health benefits and retirement, right? They're still getting the same amount of money they would be getting if they weren't using an EMO. It's just the difference is that the non-EMO is eligible for the state benefits and the EMO school is not, because they're not a state employee. But lots of EMOs, go out and find health insurance that's equivalent or better for the price than they do for the state benefits. Because so all the employees are going to get benefits. It just depends on whether or not you're eligible for the PIBA or you're not. Your school's still getting the money either way.
Right. But so, and I think probably he and I are asking a similar question. So, but ultimately you're still saying that if we were a non-EMO school, it is very expensive for us as a school to put them in state retirement, or no? Did I misunderstand that?
No. Right. So if you are using an EMO, you are not eligible for state retirement nor state benefits. You are still getting the money for that, though, to figure it out for your employees, however you figure it out, to still provide those services. If you are a non-EMO and you are a straight independent school, you're going to get money, the same amount of money, but the issue is that once you get into state retirement, you cannot get out. It does not matter how expensive it gets, you're stuck. And every single person in your school has to be in it. And I mean all of them, the only way out of that is if you have international teachers, because you typically only have them for a couple of years and they go back. But yeah, and so that's it. That is the problem with retirement. It's all or nothing. And once you're in and you're stuck. You can't get out. That's why charter schools don't do it, because you don't have to. You're exempt from that. You
Gotcha.
want to do. Mhm. Right. Because one thing, understand, charter schools are really about free capital, right? Free market trade and all that. So one of the things reason that you're exempt from a lot of these things is you are more than welcome to go out and find a company that provides you just as good of benefits or better for a good price.
Right.
That's part of what you do. And same for retirement. You're certainly welcome to go out there and you find the best situation for your staff, and you make decisions on things for them, such as deciding on a retirement company that says, it's your money. If you leave with your money. You don't have to be vested so many years. Those are decisions you get to make as a board with whatever companies you deal with. When you stay at retirement, you don't get that. Now, the problem that's going to hit you guys is that when you're trying, and Damon and I've had this conversation, is that if you're not vested in state retirement, you probably are not going to come work at a charter school until you are, because you're either going to have to buy out the rest of your retirement, or you're going to lose it. You're going to lose the state's part of it. So that is one of the difficult things. That is why you see particularly new charter schools have really new teachers and retired teachers, or teachers who are coming from out of state that aren't in the system at all. So I'm either never been in it, I'm already out of it, or I'm coming in, but I'm not eligible for it anyway. Right. So, right now, when you're thinking about this, these are questions that obviously, I am more than welcome you to call me and I'll talk you through some more of that. Okay, and I think we just went all over this just for a second, but let's keep going because I want to talk about contracts and not contracts. All right. So in a traditional district, a teacher has a contract for 1 year. We do not have to do contracts in charter schools. We can do at-will agreements, and those can look like whatever you want them to look like. It might be that they're 10 months. You can follow that traditional. They work 240 hours. You can say, look, you're an employee. That's it. You're an employee. And so, that means that you're a 365-day, just like if you went and worked at Walmart or the mall, right? You've got so many days a week you work, and whatever. You can do that if you want to. You just need to be very clear with us on what that looks like for the employee. Teachers are very, very used to that system of I get a contract in April, because that's what the law says they have to do for traditional districts. And, and that's my contract. And we have a contract. You don't have contracts in charter schools if you choose not to. And the only person that you should ever really contract with as best practice is your principal. And if you are in a situation where you have a hard time keeping a special ed teacher, maybe then. But otherwise, you have at-will agreements so that if you decide this person's not good and you've made a mistake in hiring, you can tell them, thanks, but we're going to let you go. On the other flip side of that, they can see that there's a job over in the local district and they're going to make $5,000 more a year. So they can say, see ya, not coming in tomorrow, I'm done, and leave you kind of hanging. So it's a double-edged sword. There's some good things to it. There's some bad things to it. As you know, in the traditional district, there's many, many steps you have to go through before you let someone go. We are not a teachers union state. So really it's just basically that contract and the basic laws that we have, which you are exempt from. So really, again, I would encourage you to go online and look at other charter schools' employment handbooks and kind of look at how they do it, how many days off they give people. Are they using the traditional 240, 180, or are they doing something different and unique? You need to think about that. We're so kind of stuck in the mindset of school starts in August and it ends in May, June, and then teachers are off all summer. And we're really starting to see also across the country, a real shift from that, right? And so we're starting to see kind of a different schedule. Like my husband's school, for the first time, his district just went to, they start earlier, but understanding in South Carolina, there is a state law that says you cannot start until the third Monday of August, but you as a charter school are exempt from that. But a traditional district has to go get permission for that. And so you're starting to see a lot of traditional districts go and ask for waivers of that because they want to have alternative schedules. And, you know, that's part of your academic part, is talking about your everyday in your academic schedule. So you need to, in this application, under employees, I need to see how you're telling me that employees are going to have this kind of schedule, and it looks like this in their at-will agreements, that you're going to tell me how that's going to work, so that when you start hiring, you just don't start hiring like a traditional district and then think, uh-oh, what did I do? You're going to follow what your charter says you're going to do. So does that make sense? You got a lot of leeway here. Don't fall into just go look like the traditional district. Be creative. Because quite frankly, the traditional district, unless you're in a poor district, is probably going to pay better than you. So you got to figure out a way to get those employees. And it might be that they get to keep more time than they do in a traditional district. It might mean that they get more time off. It can be lots of different things. Be creative, because you've got to attract teachers, and what you're offering, you know, might have to make up for the money that they are not going to make from you. Okay. Okay. So it's 10 till 7. I guess I need to hustle up a little bit through this. So EMOs, if you're contracted with an EMO and the EMO actually is the employer of those teachers, what will happen is that you'll see that every month, once the school gets its allocation, the EMO sends a bill for all the services it's provided. And those services include teacher benefits, teacher retirement, teacher salaries, you know, everything else they've provided every month. So that, but they're still employees of the EMO. And what that means, guys, is this. The principal, if the principal works for the EMO, the board does not hire and fire the principal. The board, let me see if I can get to that. And I'll have to get back to this now. Let's see. The board contracts with the EMO, and their job is to evaluate, is the EMO doing what it's supposed to do? Is it doing what our contract says? And that's all it does, except for it still sets policy that are student policies, but it does not set employment policies. It sets student policies. Okay. So that's when, you know, again, that's when you're talking about contracting with EMO, you're saying operationally, you handle it. We're going to focus on the outcomes of the school and the policies that need to be set to the school that affect the student body. So there's a big difference in running a school with an EMO and not an EMO. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to where we were. And I want to say this, because if you're thinking about using an EMO, this is really a better situation where you just call me and let's talk about that. Devon and I are having that conversation, just because it's a process and you just need to think through it. And if you're not going to use that, there's no reason for me to sit here and tell you all that and take up your time. Okay, another thing about employees is you have the ability to hire up to 25% of your teaching staff to be non-certified. That doesn't mean you're hiring some Joe Blow off the street. It means that you may hire someone who has content knowledge and can prove that content knowledge either by they have a degree in it, they've got 18 or plus higher level classes in it, they could have a master's degree in it, they can go take the practice, they have a content knowledge and has proven that, but they're not certified because they didn't want to be a teacher in college and go through the certification program. But we're talking about that 25% is of your core classes, but pretty much most everything in South Carolina is a core class, except for like drama and driver's ed, a few things like that. So that is counted by the number of classes they teach, not the number of staff you have. But you do have that. Unlike a traditional school, they cannot do that. They don't have that luxury. Okay, the teacher evaluation system, you must put in your application, you must tell us either you're going to just use the state's the TAP program or the ADEPT. Most people use ADEPT. You may create your own, but if you create your own, you must have the State Department approve it. But you are more than welcome to do that. That is one of the luxuries about being a charter school. Principal evaluation. I thought this little funny picture, I will say, it's the guy from The Simpsons, but I tell you, it reminds me of the principal in The Breakfast Club. If you can remember that in the 80s, doesn't he look like that guy, right? The principal evaluation, there is PDEPT, which is the state evaluation, which if you have a principal that is maybe a young principal and you're not going to keep them forever and ever, and they want to move on, traditional school, big school, something like that, they really want to use the PDEPT so they get credit for the number of years they've served if they go back into the traditional district. But you get a retired principal, they're not going back to traditional district. You do not have to use PDEPT. You create your own. It's up to you. You don't have to. But if they want years of service to go towards their work resume for the State Department, you do have to use PDEPT. And if you do that, it means that one of your board members has to go and be trained in the evaluation. But again, as a board, if you are not working with an EMO who hires the staff, then it is your decision how you evaluate the principal. My suggestion is you actually do have a conversation with the principal before you say that. You might write in your charter, we will make that decision based on the principal that we hire. We will certainly be able to do either one. For that person, we'll do ADEPT. But if we don't hire someone who needs PDEPT, we'll create our own, however you want to do that. But if you just say, no, we're going to use PDEPT, then you also need to tell me someone's going to go and be trained in that. Another thing is just, if you want to adopt kind of the regulations of the local district, because all your teachers are coming out of that local district, you can do that. But I'm going to tell you right now, that's not a good idea. So I would leave that alone, and you're not doing that. You can't do one, or you can't do both of 1 and 2 here. Either you do your own or you accept the local districts. If you are authorized by a local district, sometimes that's easier just to adopt the local districts, but you're not if you're coming to Limestone or going to Erskine or the charter school district. So therefore, you'd really want to do number 2. Okay. You must have a grievance procedure that tells for the teachers that they can, if they get fired, have a hearing with the board. Now, here's the rub on that. Who is hired and fired is an operational decision, except for the principal. It is not a decision for the board to make. However, if someone comes to the board and says, I was fired for an illegal reason, then you can overturn the principal. If they come and say, the principal and I had it out, we have difference of opinions, you really can't, because that's an operational decision, not an illegal decision. Somebody comes in and claims racism or sexism or religion. I'm a Muslim, and the teacher didn't know that when they hired me, but then the principal, and then they found out, and then they fired me for that. Absolutely, that's an illegal firing, and you would step in and have that, have an actual hearing where you may overturn the principal, unless the principal says, no, look at all the things that this issue, whatever. Please do not, in this situation, like I said, you've got to turn in your handbook, a sample handbook. Don't take a traditional district's policies and make it your own without really making sure you're going through it and determining whether or not those are things you are going to do. Okay. Okay, back to the EMO. Really EMOs can be an EMO, which is an education management organization, or they can be a CMO, which is a charter management organization. A charter management organization is typically a nonprofit itself. So that means that organization has its own board. An EMO is not, it is a for-profit company. And so it is just owned by either several people, one person, however that works, but they both provide services to the school. They both can have school models and say, this is how our school model works, right? And they're, some of them will do curriculum, some of them won't. Some of them say, look, we don't really care what you want to do as a curriculum. That's a board's decision. Tell us what you want to do. We're just going to make that happen for you. We're not going to come to you and say, this is how our system works for curriculum. Some of them will, some of them won't. But most of them do the back office stuff for you. It's economy to scale. They're going to, it helps you. Oh, you need some money. They'll find you the backing for that. You want a new building, they'll help you do that. So all those things that really are day-to-day stuff with the school, or the big stuff like getting open. I mean, I will tell you, EMOs and CMOs put a ton of money into getting schools open. And then they have a contract for the life of the charter to make sure, one, they make their money back, and then they provide a service for a fee. Again, if you are thinking about that, please call me and I'll talk you through what that really looks like and what that means. I mean, there's a ton of EMOs and CMOs out there. You just have to know the good from the bad. Okay. They do have to be licensed in South Carolina as an EMO. And it's really good if the people who run that EMO have run schools before. So you certainly don't want to contract with someone who's never done any of that. All right. In your application, if you decide to do that, you really need to talk about that relationship, and you'll have to turn in a sample contract between the school and the EMO. Transportation, you get no money. You also don't have to provide it. If you choose to provide it, then you must also provide any special education transportation that might be required in a student's IEP. That is determined by the IEP team, not the school principal that says, oh no, we can't afford that. If you do one, you have to do both. Now think of this, and so I get a lot of schools that have a really kind of like, a lot of schools that are like, well, if we get a kid and that, they've got their IEP, we're gonna have to do that no matter what. No, you don't. Think of it this way. General ed, all right, special ed is access to the general ed curriculum. That's what special ed is. If you don't have general ed, you don't have special ed, because what you're trying to do in special ed is make it to where that kid can access all the information that kids are supposed to be learning at that age. The big yellow school bus is regular ed. Everybody rides the school bus, right? Unless your parents going to drive them. They get on the bus. It's for every kid. But there are some kids who cannot ride the big school bus. That is general ed. They cannot access general ed. So they ride the little bus. And it's usually little because of the number of kids that get on it. Whether that's behavior, whether it's their physical situation, they can't do it. Lots of different reasons kids have transportation or IEP. So if you don't provide the big school bus, you don't have to provide the little school bus. Everybody got that understanding? But, now having said that, that is just your general everyday come and go to school. Typically, as a charter school, you're serving such a big area, you can't afford to really provide transportation. It is mostly parents bringing their kid. Certainly, we like to see schools who can kind of help parents work out a ride share plan, but please be careful when you do that. Please don't tell me in your application that you're going to organize that, because that could also get you in trouble for having to organize a special ed child's transportation, and it can make you liable if something happens. So really, you will give parents access to meeting each other, but you should not be organizing that. You don't get any state funds for it, so you don't have to do it. If you do it, then understand those are the qualifications. And you also have to have, someone who is trained as a bus driver, It can't be Joe Blow down the street. They have to have a CDL license and go through all the same trainings. What you see is a lot of schools will have an activity bus. That is fine. You know, you go to basketball games or wherever, right? Field trips or whatever. Again, you must still be able to provide transportation for a child that has a transportation on an IEP for, you know, coming in, they just can't get on that bus, whatever it is, right? You still have to provide that. Also, what you'll see is that schools will contract out to private companies to provide that transportation as the activity bus and not own their own bus. You can own your own bus. My school in Myrtle Beach, we have a bus, and ours is kind of it's a small bus that we bought because we don't have a ton of kids needing to ride the bus, but we know that in that particular bus, we can provide special education transportation if needed. So make sure you're careful. So if you tell me in your application you are going to provide transportation and then you decide not to, you'll have to come back and make an amendment because you said you were going to do that. It is better for you to say, we're not going to do that. And then if you can figure out how to do that later, then yeah, you can come back and say, we've decided to do that. All right. Okay, that's it. Anybody have any questions? I know we're a little over, sorry about that, but not much. Ask away. If not, I'll have this up on the website in the next couple of days. All right, it's, you know, guys, it's almost November. And so I hope you are right. I love the fact that I'm you know, consistently having a couple of people here. And I know there are people watching these videos on their own. I am going to be at the conference. So if you are even thinking about going, I'm urging you to go to the charter school conference. I'll be there. It'll be a good time to sit down with me, ask me questions. Also coming up is the letter of intent that is due November 1st to me and the State Department. That link to.
I thought I saw the 8th on the thing. Did it change or something? I was on the other day, saying November the 8th. Did they give you extra week?
It is what the law says is that your application is due February 1st. The letter of intent is due 90 days prior to the application. So whatever 90 days is, but it usually works out to be like, I think, November 1st. So you have to give it to me and you have to send it to the State Department. What that does is it gives the authorizers an idea of how many readers they might need. You know, not all of you will actually end up turning an application in, but it just gives us an idea so that we're not like, holy crap, we thought we were going to get 2 or 3 and we got 20. Because as authorizers, once that application comes in, we have 90 days to hear it. And that's a lot of work to turn over and have capacity hearings and then real hearings with the board for passage or not in 90 days, because it's a big piece of document you're trying to read. So you must turn that letter of intent in or you cannot turn in an application. So if you go to the website, limestonecharters.org, and go to new schools, the link is there. Fill it out, send it to me if you're going to apply with us, and send it to the State Department. There's a tells you where to send it. Okay.
Hey, so one quick question on that. A little off topic, but for that application, I understand it's state law for vacant school buildings that they have to offer that first to charter schools. Does that only apply once approved? Does that apply once the application is submitted or the letter of intent?
Well, it just says charter schools. So the issue becomes at this point, if you're not approved, you're not a charter school.
Right.
If you get approved the day after, the day you get approved, you're eligible for that.
Sure. Okay. Gotcha.
Only, just be clear now, they only have to offer that to you if they're going to sell it.
Right.
They can literally let it sit there and rot. If they're not going to sell it, they don't have to offer it to you.
Right.
Yeah, so and let me say this, and you know, I met with Damon the other day and I went and looked at a building that he's in for his program. I gave him some feedback. If you have access to that building, I am more than happy to come up to Cherokee and go through that building and tell you what you're looking at and what you're going to have to do and tell you about what that's going to cost you. Based on my experience of opening 3 schools and what I thought was going to be this much money, and it turned out to be this much money. You know, you think it's a good building until you understand that there's assembly code and then there's school code. And It may not make sense all the time, but it is what it is. So I'm more than welcome to do that. And that'll give you an idea whether you want that building or not. And let me say this, if a school district's getting rid of a building, it's probably a really bad building because they'll do whatever they can do not to get rid of buildings because taxpayers don't like it when they see schools sit there and rot.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, you know, something built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you know, that's a lot of work. You know? But again, let me know and I'll be glad to come up and look at it for sure.
Okay.
Okay, guys.
All right.
All right, so wait a minute, let me look at my calendar here, just make sure when we talk about the next one. Because it is going to be on, let's see here. It's on the 9th, not the 2nd. It's going to be on the 9th of November. So that means that this is the last one until that letter of intent is due. So please make sure you get it in. And if you decide not to apply this year, no biggie. But you cannot apply if you don't turn that in. Okay. I hate to say this because I actually was created the letter of intent like years and years ago. But it wasn't really to keep people from turning in. It was I had an idea how many I thought I might get. But at this point, it has turned into it's a requirement. So it is what it is. Okay, guys.
Or what if you turn it in, but then you decide to wait? So you got to turn another one in the next year?
Yeah, every time you do it, you'll turn one in, right? It's just, again, it's really just to give people an idea of what might be, not necessarily what will be. You know, like if I only get 15 letters of intent, I know that I'm not going to have any more than 15 applications turned in. But just remember, it has to go to me and the state. Okay. And quite frankly, I'll tell you, just to be on this, unless the state's got some kind of revision that says it has to come from the school, if you send it to me, I'm gonna turn around and send it to the state for you, even if they get it twice, just to make sure. So, okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right, guys. See you next time. Call me if you need. Okay. All right. Bye.
All right.